The fire didn't start by accident. Someone planned it, someone paid for it. And on the night it happened, Justina Blackwell stood barefoot in the wet grass outside her childhood home in Mississippi, watching everything she had ever known turn to ash. She was 24 years old. Her parents were still inside. "Gideon!" she screamed, spinning around in the smoke. "Gideon!" Her 17-year-old brother burst through the side door, coughing, his shirt burned at the collar, his bald head covered in soot. "I tried to go back in," he gasped. "Jews, I tried." "Don't." She grabbed him, held him so tight he couldn't breathe. "Don't you dare go back in there." The flames roared. The roof caved. And somewhere inside that inferno, their parents took their last breath. The firefighters arrived too late. The police filed a report. The insurance paid out almost nothing. And within 3 weeks, the town that had known the Blackwell family for 30 years went completely silent, as if they had never existed at all. That silence told Justina everything she needed to know. This was no accident, but she had no proof, no money, no allies. All she had was a traumatized brother, a duffel bag, and a one-way bus ticket to Los Angeles. So she ran. She just didn't know she was running straight into the most complicated, dangerous, and earth-shattering chapter of her life. Los Angeles did not welcome Justina Blackwell. It tolerated her. She spent the first 2 weeks sharing a single-room apartment with Gideon in East LA, surviving on instant noodles and sheer willpower while she sent out job applications every single day. Receptionist, data entry, customer service, restaurant hostess, retail, rejection after rejection. "You're overqualified. We've already filled the position. We'll keep your resume on file." She knew what some of those rejections really meant. She had seen the way interviewers looked at her curves, at her youth, at her brown eyes that had seen too much grief for someone her age. She wasn't what they expected. She wasn't what they wanted. On a Tuesday morning in early October, Justina put on her last clean blouse, fixed her long black hair into a tight bun, and walked into the glass tower on Wilshire Boulevard that housed Anderson Enterprises, one of the most powerful private holding companies on the West Coast. She hadn't even applied. She walked in on a rumor, a whisper she had overheard at a coffee shop, that Anderson Enterprises had just lost their secretary and the position hadn't been posted yet. The receptionist at the front desk looked her up and down. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Justina said, "but I have a resume, and I'm the best assistant you've never hired." The receptionist almost smiled. "Almost? Mr. Anderson doesn't see walk-ins." "Then tell him a walk-in is here who isn't leaving until he does." 3 minutes later, she was in an elevator, going up to the 32nd floor, not because Barry Anderson agreed to see her, but because his office manager, a tired-looking woman named Helen, had taken one look at Justina's resume and decided the girl deserved 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes changed everything. Barry Anderson's office was exactly what she expected. Cold, precise, expensive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a desk so large it could double as a conference table. No personal photos, no plants, no warmth whatsoever. Barry himself was on a phone call when she was shown in. He didn't look up. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his charcoal suit like it had been stitched directly onto him. His black hair was neat, His full beard was trimmed, and when he finally lifted his blue eyes from the document in front of him and looked at, Justina really looked at her, his expression didn't change at all. That was somehow more intimidating than anger. He ended the call, set the phone down, and stared at her. "You walked in without an appointment," he said. His voice was low and even, like someone who had never needed to raise it to get what he wanted. "Yes," Justina said. "Why?" "Because I need this job. And I'm good enough for it." A pause. "Everyone who walks into my building thinks they're good enough." "Then test me," she said. "Give me 1 week. No salary. Just a trial. If I don't perform above your expectations, I'll leave without argument." Barry's eyes stayed on her. Unreadable. She held his gaze not defiantly but steadily. She had cried every tear she had over a Mississippi grave. She had none left to waste on nerves. He looked down at her resume. "You're from Mississippi." "Yes." "What brought you to LA?" "A beat. A fresh start." He studied her face. Something shifted behind his eyes, barely perceptible, like a crack of light under a closed door. He was an orphan himself. He knew what a fresh start really meant. He knew what it cost. "You have the job," he said. "Full salary. Standard contract. You start Monday." Justina blinked. "Just like that? Don't make me change my mind." Working for Barry Anderson was like trying to keep up with a machine. He arrived at the office at 6:30 every morning. He expected Justina at 6:45. His schedule was back-to-back from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Calls, meetings, negotiations, board reviews, acquisitions. The man never stopped, and he never, ever made it easy on her. Blackwell. His voice through the intercom on her third day, clipped, impatient. "Yes, Mr. Anderson?" "The Matsuda file. Where is it?" "On your desk. Left side. Behind the Tokyo acquisition folder." A pause. "It's here." "I know." Another pause. Longer this time. Then the intercom clicked off. That was the closest thing to a compliment she got for the first 2 weeks. He was strict. He was demanding. He rarely smiled and never made small talk. He had rules for everything: how calls were screened, how meetings were organized, how correspondence was formatted, and he expected every single rule to be followed without explanation or question. Justina followed every one of them. She didn't complain. She didn't flirt. She didn't linger at his door hoping he would notice her. She did her job brilliantly, quietly, completely, and then she went home to Gideon and started preparing for the next day. She had heard the stories. Rose, his previous secretary, a beautiful woman who had apparently found a way into his office after hours, found a way into his liquor cabinet, and found a way to make things very, very complicated. Barry had fired her on the spot. Then he had fired every other woman in the building. Justina had no intention of becoming a cautionary tale, so she buried it. The way his cologne lingered in the elevator after he stepped out, the way his hands moved when he was reviewing contracts, deliberate, precise, the way he sometimes stood at his window at the end of the day and just looked at the city like it owed him something. She buried all of it. And that, ironically, was her mistake. Because Barry Anderson, a man who had watched a parade of beautiful, eager, calculating women try and fail to get under his skin, had never in his life met a woman who simply didn't try. and it was driving him absolutely insane. He started noticing things he had no business noticing. The way she organized his calendar, not just efficiently, but intuitively, like she could predict what he needed before he asked. The way she held herself in meetings, composed, attentive, never performing. The way she always had his coffee ready at exactly the right temperature, not because he had told her how he liked it, but because she had paid attention. He found himself looking for reasons to call her into his office. He hated that. One evening, 3 weeks into her employment, he called her in at 7 p.m. when most of the floor was empty. "Sit down," he said, not looking up from his laptop. She sat, crossed her hands in her lap, waited. "You're not from a wealthy background," he said. It wasn't a question. "No, but you carry yourself like you are." He finally looked at her. "Why?" She considered that for a moment. "My mother used to say that dignity isn't something you buy. It's something you decide to have." Barry was quiet for a long moment. "What happened to her?" Justina met his eyes. "She died." He nodded slowly. Something in his jaw shifted. "I'm sorry." "So am I," she said. And then, because she could feel the conversation getting dangerous, because she could feel the warmth creeping into his blue eyes, and she absolutely could not afford to feel what she was starting to feel, she stood up. "Is there anything else you need tonight, Mr. Anderson?" He looked at her for 1 second too long. "No," he said. "Go home, Blackwell." She walked out. She kept her face neutral all the way to the elevator. She kept it neutral through the lobby. She kept it neutral until she stepped out onto Wilshire Boulevard and the cool night air hit her face. Then she closed her eyes. "Stop it," she told herself. "He is your boss. He gave you a chance when no one else would. Don't ruin this. Don't you dare ruin this." She opened her eyes, straightened her spine, and walked to her car. But someone else had already noticed Justina Blackwell. And unlike Barry, he had absolutely no intention of being subtle about it. If you're already hooked, and I know you are, smash that subscribe button right now and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this. And drop a comment, Team Barry or Team Derek. Let's go! Derek Dwayne arrived at Anderson Enterprises on a Wednesday afternoon like he owned the place, because in his mind, he co-owned everything worth owning in Los Angeles. He was average height, muscular, with curly hair and a small nose ring that somehow made him look more dangerous than ridiculous. He wore his suits open at the collar. He smiled too easily. He shook hands like he was doing you a favor. He was Barry's best friend, his business partner, and the most charming, calculating man in any room he walked into. He strolled past Justina's desk without stopping, tossed a hay in her direction, pushed open Barry's office door without knocking, and then stopped. Turned around, walked back to her desk. Justina looked up from her screen. Derek's eyes moved over her face slowly, like he was memorizing it. Then he smiled wide, warm, practiced. "You're new," he said. "Mr. Anderson is expecting you," she said. "He can wait 30 seconds. Derek leaned on the edge of her desk. "What's your name?" His schedule is already running tight. "Your name," Derek said again, softer this time, almost gentle. "Justina," she said flatly, "and Mr. Anderson really is waiting." Derek straightened up, looked at her for one more moment. Then he walked into Barry's office wearing a smile that had nothing to do with business. Barry looked up. "You're late. I was introducing myself to your new secretary." Derek dropped into the chair across from him. "Where did you find her?" Barry's expression didn't change. "She's an employee, not a topic of conversation." "She's gorgeous." "Derek, I'm just saying, I know what you're saying." Barry closed his laptop. His voice was quiet and absolutely final. "Don't." Derek tilted his head. He had known Barry Anderson for 15 years. He had watched the man close billion-dollar deals without blinking. He had watched him walk away from women who would have made other men lose their minds. But he had never not once heard Barry use that tone about a woman on his staff. Interesting, Derek thought. And from that moment, his interest in Justina Blackwell stopped being casual. The next day, Derek sent her flowers. No card, no name, just a bouquet of white orchids delivered to her desk at 9 in the morning. Justina stared at them. Then she picked up her phone and sent a message to the front desk. "Please have these removed from my workstation. They're a distraction." The flowers disappeared within 10 minutes. When Derek found out, and he did find out, because he had eyes everywhere, he laughed out loud. He laughed for a long time. Then he started planning. Meanwhile, Barry was losing a battle he hadn't officially entered. He started arriving at the office earlier, telling himself it was about productivity. He started taking longer routes through the floor, telling himself it was about visibility. And he started finding more reasons to call Justina into meetings she had no technical reason to attend. One afternoon, during a property acquisition review with 4 of his senior directors, he glanced up and found himself looking at the seat beside him empty and felt a specific, irritating absence. He picked up his phone, texted her one line, "Conference room B, now." She appeared 90 seconds later, tablet in hand, expression neutral. She sat down without asking why she was there. She took notes. She flagged 2 inconsistencies in the contract figures that none of the senior directors had caught. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, Barry stopped her at the door. "Those figures you flagged," he said. "Good catch." She looked at him. "It's my job." Still. A pause. Something moved behind his eyes that he shut down immediately. "Good work, Blackwell." She nodded. Walked out. Barry stood alone in the conference room for a moment longer than necessary. He was in serious trouble. The meeting was Derek's idea. He told Barry it was about expanding their joint logistics venture, a deal that required his uncle, Mr. Richard's blessing, since a portion of the operating capital was tied to the Duane family trust. Barry agreed. Reluctantly. He had always found Mr. Richard Duane unsettling, a man in his early 50s who moved through the world like someone who had never once faced a consequence. Tall, slightly heavy-set, with grey hair and brown eyes that never quite matched his smiles. He had a reputation for ruthlessness that made even Barry's board members nervous. The meeting was scheduled for Barry's boardroom. Barry, Derek, Mr. Richard, and Justina, who was there to take minutes. Everything was normal for exactly 4 minutes. Then Mr. Richard looked up from the agenda and saw Justina. The room temperature didn't actually drop, but it felt like it did. Mr. Richard went completely still. His pen stopped moving. The colour drained slowly from his face. He stared at Justina with an expression that was somewhere between recognition and horror, like a man who had seen a ghost wearing a familiar face. Justina noticed. She held her pen steady and kept her eyes on her tablet, but her hands had gone cold. "Mr. Duane," Barry said evenly, watching him. "The agenda." Mr. Richard didn't respond. His eyes stayed on Justina. "Richard." Derek touched his uncle's arm. "You all right?" Mr. Richard finally blinked. He opened his mouth, closed it again, looked down at the table, looked back up at Justina, who... He stopped himself, cleared his throat. "Forgive me. I thought for a moment that I recognized." He shook his head. "It's nothing." But it was not nothing. Everyone in that room could feel it. Barry's jaw was tight. He looked from Mr. Richard to Justina and back again. Something cold moved through his chest, protective, fierce, and completely irrational. "We're done here," Barry said. "Barry," Derek started. "I said we're done." Barry stood. His voice was like a locked door. "Helen will see you out, both of you, and until further notice, this building is off limits." Derek's eyes went wide. "You're banning us from your... Get out, Derek." The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Richard stood slowly. He straightened his jacket. He didn't look at Barry. He looked at Justina one last time, long and searching, and then he walked out. When the room was empty, Barry turned to Justina. She was still sitting, still composed, but her knuckles were white around her tablet. "Are you all right?" he asked. Quiet, direct, no corporate distance in his voice at all. She looked up at him. "I don't know what that was." "Neither do I," he said. "But I'm going to find out." Something changed after that day. The professional wall between Barry and Justina didn't disappear, but it developed cracks. Small ones, the kind that let light through. He started checking in. Not formally, not through the intercom. Actually walking to her desk and asking casually, like it cost him nothing how she was doing, how Gideon was settling into school, whether she needed anything. She answered carefully, briefly, keeping her heart on a tight leash. But one Friday evening, she stayed late finishing a quarterly report. The floor was empty. The city lights glittered through the windows, and Barry emerged from his office with his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up, a takeout bag in each hand. He set one on her desk without saying a word. She looked at the bag, then at him. "You haven't eaten," he said, like it was an obvious problem with an obvious solution. "Mr. Anderson." "Barry," he said. "At least after 7 p.m. She stared at him. He sat down in the chair across from her desk, the chair she usually made clients wait in, opened his own takeout box, and started eating like this was perfectly normal. Justina was quiet for a moment. Then she opened the bag, Thai food. Her favourite. She had mentioned it exactly once, in passing, 3 weeks ago. He had remembered. She pressed her lips together and said nothing. But something in her chest came undone, quietly, irreversibly, like a knot she had been holding for months, finally letting go. They ate in silence, the comfortable kind. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "You're going to anyway," he said, without looking up. "Why did you really hire me?" A pause. He set down his fork, looked at her directly. "Because you stood in front of my desk and told me to test you," he said, "and you weren't afraid." "I was terrified," she said honestly. "I know." A small, rare, devastating smile that made it even more impressive. Justina looked down at her food before he could see what his smile was doing to her face. Too late. Barry saw it, and for the first time in years, Barry Anderson felt something he didn't immediately want to shut down. They were falling. Both of them. And neither one was ready for what was about to hit them. Don't go anywhere. Like this video right now if you're feeling the tension, and tell me in the comments, did you see what Derek was planning? Because it's coming fast. 2 weeks later, Barry asked Justina to dinner, not as her boss. He said it clearly enough that she couldn't pretend she hadn't understood. "As what then?" she asked, standing at her desk perfectly still. "As a man who would like to spend time with you outside of this office," he said. "If you're willing." She looked at him for a long time. Every sensible thought she had told her to say no. He was her boss. This was complicated. This could cost her everything, the job, the stability, Gideon's future. But sense had nothing to do with what happened in her chest when he looked at her like that. "One dinner," she said. That dinner became two. Two became a week of evenings. A week became a month. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, somewhere between his laugh that she had never heard before and his hand finding hers across a restaurant table, they became something. When he kissed her for the first time outside her apartment building on a rainy Thursday night, she pulled back and looked at him like she was trying to memorize the moment before it could be taken from her. "What are you afraid of?" he murmured. "Everything," she whispered. "I'm afraid of everything." He cupped her face in his hands. "Then let me be afraid of it with you." She kissed him back. Derek found out on a Monday. He didn't hear it from Barry. He saw them through the glass of a restaurant across the street. Completely by accident, Barry's hand over Justina's on the table. Both of them leaning in close and laughing. Derek had never seen Barry laugh like that. Easy, unguarded, real. Something ugly and cold moved through Derek's chest. He called his uncle that night. "She's with Barry," he said. Mr. Richard was quiet for a long moment. "I know, Uncle. I need to speak with that girl," Mr. Richard said. His voice was strange. "Waited. Privately. Whatever it takes. And if Barry gets in the way?" Another pause. "Longer. Then we remove him from the equation," Mr. Richard said. Derek ended the call, sat in the dark of his penthouse for a long time. Then he made a different call to Rose. Rose arrived at Anderson Enterprises on a Tuesday morning like a storm dressed in designer clothing. She was everything. She had always been stunning, confident, and completely aware of both facts. She had worked as Barry's secretary for 2 years before the incident. She knew his office layout, his schedule, his preferences, and every single one of his vulnerabilities. More importantly, she was furious. Being fired had cost her everything: her income, her reputation, her professional network. She blamed Barry for all of it, even though she had been the one who made the move. Bitterness had a way of rewriting history, and Rose had had months to rewrite hers. Derek had found her working at a second-tier firm in downtown. He had offered her money, more money than she would make in 5 years. All she had to do was walk into Barry's office and say 4 words. "I'm carrying your child." She had practiced them in the mirror. She had them ready. What she hadn't counted on was Justina being in the office when she walked in. Barry and Justina were reviewing weekend contracts together, a domestic scene that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago when the reception called up. "A Miss Rose Henson is here. She says it's personal." Barry's expression flickered, just barely. "Send her up." Justina watched his face. "Who is Rose?" "My previous secretary." His voice was even, but something behind his eyes had gone cautious. Rose walked in 3 minutes later. She looked around the office, took in Justina, took in the closeness of their positioning, took in everything, and then she looked at Barry with eyes full of tears that had been preloaded and ready. "Barry," she said. Her voice broke perfectly. "I didn't know where else to go." "Rose." Barry stood. "Whatever you need to say it." Rose put her hand on her stomach and looked at him. The room went absolutely silent. "I'm pregnant," she said. "It's yours." The word hit Justina like a physical blow. She felt the air leave her body. She felt the floor shift. She kept her face completely still through sheer force of will, a skill she had perfected over a lifetime of loss, and said nothing. Barry went very still. "That's not possible." "The night I came to your office," Rose said, "you were drinking. You don't remember, but I said that's not possible." His voice was flat steel. "I have proof," Rose said softly, and she held out her phone a photo of what appeared to be a positive pregnancy test with a date stamp. The silence stretched. Justina stood up, quietly, smoothly, like a woman who had been preparing for exactly this kind of devastation her entire life. "I'll give you privacy," she said. "Justina." Barry reached for her arm. She stepped back. "Just slightly, just enough." "It's all right," she said, and her voice was so controlled, so perfectly calm, that it broke something in the room that couldn't be repaired in that moment. She walked out. She made it to the elevator. She made it to the lobby. She made it to the parking garage. And then she sat in her car, gripped the steering wheel with both hands, and let out a breath that shook her whole body. Of course, she thought. Of course. She had let herself hope. She had let herself fall. And the universe had responded the way it always did by taking the floor out from under her. That night, she packed a bag for herself and Gideon. She called a number in San Diego, a woman from a church charity who had once offered to help if she ever needed it. She booked a motel room, and she changed her phone number. She did not say goodbye to Barry. Oh no, she didn't. She ran. She actually ran. Comment right now, was that the right move? And subscribe if you haven't already, because what happens next will absolutely destroy you in the best way. Barry spent 48 hours in controlled fury. He had Rose detained, not physically, but legally. A paternity attorney, a private investigator, a demand for clinical verification of the pregnancy. Rose lasted exactly 6 hours under professional pressure before the story started to crack. The pregnancy test photo had metadata inconsistencies. The date stamp didn't match the file creation timestamp, and when Barry's PI started pulling phone records, Derek Dwayne's number appeared in Rose's call log 17 times in the 2 weeks before her visit. Barry called Derek. Derek didn't answer. Barry called again. "Hey," Derek started. "Was it you?" Barry's voice was quiet, quieter than anger. The kind of quiet that comes after anger burns completely through. A pause. Barry, listen. Was it you? Silence. Barry ended the call. He had his answer. He arrested Rose through his legal team fraud, extortion, and conspiracy charges. Faced with real criminal consequences, Rose broke completely. She gave a full statement. She named Derek. She admitted she was never pregnant. She confirmed it was planned from the beginning. Barry sat in his office with that information for a long time. Then he thought about Justina, her face, in that moment before she walked out. That terrible, controlled calm, that practiced devastation. He picked up his phone. Her number was disconnected. He drove to her apartment. Empty. She had cleared out. He went to Gideon's high school. Gideon Blackwell was not happy to see him. The 17-year-old stood in the school hallway with his arms crossed, bearded jaw tight, looking at Barry with a particular combination of protectiveness and suspicion that reminded Barry uncomfortably of Justina herself. "She doesn't want to be found," Gideon said. "I know." Barry met his eyes. "But I need you to listen to me. What Rose said, it was a lie. All of it. Derek paid her to do it. I have a confession. I have the charges. I can show you everything." Gideon looked at him for a long time, reading him. The way Justina read people. "She cried," Gideon said quietly. "She didn't think I heard her. But I did. She cried all night." Barry said nothing. "What was there to say?" "If I tell you where she is," Gideon said, "and you hurt her again, I won't." "You don't get to promise that." "No," Barry said. "I don't. But I'm asking anyway." Gideon uncrossed his arms, looked at the floor. Then he pulled out his phone and read out an address in San Diego. "She's going to be so mad at me," he muttered. "I'll take the blame," Barry said. "You better." The motel in San Diego was nothing like the places Barry Anderson normally went. Single story, faded paint, a parking lot that smelled of salt air from the coast 2 blocks away. He found room 14, knocked twice, and waited. Silence. He knocked again. "Justina, it's me." More silence. Then, through the door, "How did you find me? Your brother has a conscience." A pause. "I'm going to kill him. He made me promise to take the blame." Another pause. Then the lock clicked. She opened the door. She was wearing an oversized sweater and no shoes, and her long black hair was down. He had never seen it down before. Her brown eyes were steady, but there were shadows under them that hadn't been there a week ago. She didn't step back to let him in. "Rose lied," he said. "Not as an explanation, as a fact. Derek hired her. She was never pregnant. She confessed everything. She's facing criminal charges." Justina searched his face. "And Derek is no longer my friend, or my business partner." A pause. "Or anything." She looked at him for a long, searching moment. Then she stepped back. He walked in. They sat across from each other. Him on the single chair, her on the edge of the bed. The motel room felt very small and very honest. "I should have let you explain," she said quietly. "You don't have to." "I ran," she said. "I know I ran. I always run." She looked down at her hands. When things fall apart, I grab Gideon and I run. It's the only thing I know how to do. It kept you alive, he said. She looked up. Whatever happened in Mississippi, he said carefully. Whatever you survived, it kept you alive. There's nothing wrong with that. Her eyes filled. She didn't let the tears fall. She never let the tears fall, but they were there. Barry crossed the room. He sat beside her. He didn't touch her. He just sat close, the way she had taught herself to sit close to Gideon when he had nightmares near enough to be felt, far enough to give space. I love you, he said. Simply, completely. I have no practice at saying it, so I'm just going to say it. She let out a breath that was half a laugh. You pick the worst timing. I know. She leaned into him then, slowly, like she was allowing herself something she had spent months refusing. Her head against his shoulder, his arm coming around her. Outside the motel window, the Pacific sat grey and enormous and indifferent. Inside room 14, something healed. But Derek wasn't done. He had been watching Barry. Not openly, he was smarter than that now. He used intermediaries, people whose faces Barry wouldn't recognize, positioned at careful distances. He saw Barry go to the high school. He followed Barry to San Diego. He didn't approach. Not yet. He drove back to Los Angeles and went directly to his uncle. She's in San Diego, he said. With Barry. Mr. Richard was standing at the window of his Bel Air mansion, his back to Derek, perfectly still. And the boy? Mr. Richard said, still at the school in LA. Mr. Richard turned. And there was something in his eyes that Derek had never seen there before, something that wasn't strategy or cruelty, something almost like grief. I need to speak with Justina, Mr. Richard said, but she won't come willingly, not while Barry is with her. Derek nodded slowly. So we separate them. We bring her to us. Mr. Richard straightened. The grief disappeared back behind his eyes, replaced by something colder. Take the boy. Derek hesitated for exactly 1 second. The boy? Mr. Richard said again. Final. Derek drove to the school the next morning. Gideon was walking to the parking lot when a black SUV pulled alongside him. The window rolled down. Derek smiled. Hey, Derek said. Get in. Gideon looked at the car, then at Derek. His whole face changed. I know who you are. Good. Derek's smile didn't move. Then you know I'm not asking. 2 men stepped out of the back. Gideon run. He almost made it. When Gideon didn't come home that evening, his phone going straight to voicemail, Justina felt it before she knew it, that deep animal terror that she hadn't felt since Mississippi. She called the school. She called his friends. She called anyone who might know. Nothing. Then her new phone rang. Unknown number. Filtered voice mechanical. Unrecognizable. He's safe. For now. But whether he stays that way depends entirely on you. Tell us where you are. Come alone. Leave your boyfriend behind. In the background, faint, unmistakable Gideon's voice. Do, don't, then silent. Justina's hand was shaking. She turned to Barry, who had heard everything, who was already on his feet, jaw locked, eyes ablaze with a cold, focused fury. Tell me everything, he said. She did. Barry was quiet for exactly 30 seconds. Then, here's what we're going to do. Barry called his private legal team. He called the LAPD detective he had worked with on the fraud case. He coordinated everything in under an hour, standing in the corner of that San Diego motel room with his phone to his ear and his eyes on Justina the entire time. Then he sat down across from her. "Call them back," he said. "Give them this address. Tell them you're alone." She stared at him. "They'll come here with Gideon. They need him as proof of leverage, and they'll bring him to make sure you cooperate." He held her gaze. "The police will be positioned before they arrive. You will be in this room. You will not open the door until I tell you it's safe. And you?" A pause. "I'll be close. Bury Justina." His hands closed over hers. Firm, warm, trust me. She had spent her whole life trusting no one. She had been burned literally by the belief that she was safe. But she looked at him, and she trusted him. She called back. She gave the address. She sat in room 14 and waited. They came at midnight. 2 SUVs. Derek, Mr. Richard, 4 men, and Gideon, hands zip-tied, a bruise along his jaw, still furious, still fighting even now, shoved through the motel door ahead of them. What they found waiting for them was not a frightened woman alone. What they found were 8 police officers and Barry Anderson standing in the middle of the room with his arms crossed and his blue eyes absolutely arctic. Derek stopped dead. Mr. Richard went very pale. It was over in minutes. Gideon came to Justina, and she grabbed him the same way she had in the yard in Mississippi, the same grip, the same desperation, and held him until she stopped shaking. At the police station, Gideon told them everything. About what Mr. Richard had said while he was in custody, about the questions he had asked, about their parents, about Mississippi, about how they had died, about the way Mr. Richard had taken Gideon's phone and stared at the photos of their mother, about what Mr. Richard had said at the very end when he thought Gideon was asleep. "She has her mother's face, but she has my eyes." The room went silent. Justina sat with that sentence for a long time. "She has my eyes." She thought about Mr. Richard's face in the boardroom, the shock, the recognition, the something that she had read as menace but was actually, she realized now, something far more complicated. She thought about the fire. She thought about Mississippi. She thought about who her mother had been before she was her mother, a woman she had never fully known, a woman with a past she had never explained. She went to see Mr. Richard in his cell 3 days later. The prison visiting room was fluorescent and cold. Mr. Richard sat across the reinforced glass, looking older than she had ever seen him, the ruthlessness stripped back, leaving something underneath that looked almost human. She picked up the phone on her side of the glass. "Tell me the truth," she said. "All of it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he did. His ex-wife Mara. The marriage that had been business at the start. The affair she had discovered. The child she had been carrying when she ran a child he hadn't known about. The years he had spent hunting her, consumed by betrayal and pride, until his men found her in Mississippi with a new husband and 2 children. He had ordered the fire. He had not known about the children. He had told himself that every day since. He had not known, but his ex-wife's new husband had died. And so had she, and the children had survived. Justina sat completely still for a very long time after he finished. "You murdered my parents," she said. Her voice was a flat, quiet thing with no room for anything else. "I am sorry," Mr. Richard said, and he looked it for whatever that was worth. "I am so sorry. You have my mother's eyes," Justina said. "Do you know what that means?" He nodded, slowly. She stood up. She was done. She had what she came for. She ordered the paternity test from the doorway without looking back at him. 2 weeks later, the results came. She read them alone, in her apartment, sitting on the floor with her back against the couch, and Gideon asleep in the next room. Richard Dwayne was her biological father. The man who had burned down her childhood was her father. She sat with that for a very long time. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just sat with it the way she had learned to sit with all the impossible things life had handed her until she could breathe around it. Then she got up, made tea, and texted Barry. "I have the results. Can you come over?" He was there in 20 minutes. The man who destroyed her family is her father. And the man who betrayed his best friend for her, he just found out she's his cousin. Oh, this story's not done. Subscribe, like, comment, and do not close this video. Derek received the news from his lawyer on a Thursday morning. He sat at his kitchen table and read the paternity results 3 times. Then he put the paper down and stared at his kitchen wall for a very long time. Justina Blackwell, the woman he had schemed for, lied for, destroyed a 15-year friendship for, was his cousin. He had kidnapped his own cousin. He had plotted against a woman who shared his blood. Whatever Derek Dwayne had been charming, ruthless, relentless, something cracked open in that kitchen on that Thursday morning. It wasn't redemption. It was too soon for that. It was just the particular devastating silence of a man who finally understood the full weight of what he had done. He didn't call anyone. He just sat there. Mr. Richard's sentence was extended. The murder charges, the fire in Mississippi, added years. Significant years. His attorneys tried. His money tried harder. But the evidence, when Justina gave her full testimony and the investigation reopened with new resources, was overwhelming. He would be an old man when he got out, if he got out. He sent one letter to Justina from prison. One line: "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I hope one day you find a way to be free of me anyway." She read it. She folded it. She put it in a drawer she rarely opened. Freedom, she had learned, wasn't the absence of the past. It was the ability to walk forward anyway. On the last Saturday of November, Barry Anderson, who had never once in his adult life been accused of spontaneity, showed up at Justina's apartment with flowers and the worst excuse for casual clothing she had ever seen. "What are you wearing?" she said at the door. He looked down. "Jeans. Those are the most expensive jeans I've ever seen. You look like a CEO pretending to be a person." "I am a CEO pretending to be a person." He held out the flowers. "Let me in." She stepped back. He walked in. Gideon looked up from the couch, clocked the flowers, and immediately got up. "I have homework," Gideon announced. "You've finished your homework," Justina said. "I have more homework." He disappeared into his room. Barry suppressed a smile. Justina took the flowers, found a vase, and stood at the kitchen counter with her back to him, arranging them. "I want to talk about something," Barry said. "You want to ask something," she corrected. You get very formal when you're nervous. A pause. I'm not nervous. You're extremely nervous. Another pause. Justina. She turned. He was standing in the middle of her small, imperfect apartment, in his ridiculous, expensive jeans, this powerful, complicated, impossible man who had hired her out of recognition, fallen for her without meaning to, fought for her without hesitation, and stood in a prison visiting room, holding her hand while she received the worst news of her life. He reached into his pocket. The ring was simple. A single stone, not a performance. I don't have a speech, he said. You know I don't have speeches. I know, she said softly. I just know that every version of my life that doesn't have you in it is a version I don't want. He held her gaze, steady, real. Marry me. She looked at him. She looked at the ring. She thought briefly, involuntarily, about a fire in Mississippi, a bus to Los Angeles, a glass tower on Wilshire Boulevard, a walk-in without an appointment. She thought about her mother, her father, all of it. And then she stopped thinking. Yes, she said. From behind the bedroom door, Gideon let out a sound that was too loud to be accidental. Barry raised an eyebrow. Justina laughed. The first real, full, unguarded laugh she had let herself have in years. Barry and Justina were married in early spring, small, private, exact. No press, no spectacle. Gideon walked her down the aisle. Derek was not there. But 6 months later, he showed up at their door unannounced, quieter than he had ever been, older in his eyes, and stood on the porch with nothing in his hands and everything he needed to say visible on his face. Justina looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened the door wider. You should know, she said, that Gideon makes terrible coffee. If you're staying, you're having mine. Derek blinked. That's it? That's all you're going to say? I'm still deciding how angry I am, she said. But you're family, so come in. Barry, from somewhere inside, said nothing, but he didn't stop her. Some things take longer to forgive than others. Some things maybe never fully heal, but Justina Blackwell, who had survived a fire, a cross-country escape, a betrayal, an identity she hadn't asked for, and a love she hadn't expected, had learned the most important truth of all. She hadn't run to Los Angeles. She had been led there, to the glass tower, to the 32nd floor, to the man behind the desk with the blue eyes, who looked at her like she was a problem he was glad to have. She had been led home, and that right there is the end of the secretary's dilemma. If this story wrecked you even a little bit in the best possible way, smash that like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we drop stories just like this every single week. And in the comments, I want to know, did Justina make the right call letting Derek back in? Or would you have shut that door? Tell me. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.